Hey everyone, today we are joined by a pivotal player in the National Wrestling Alliance, the voice of the rebooted NWA, and one of the best play-by-play commentators, in my opinion, in the industry today. Joe, thank you so much for joining us.
How's it going, Ken?
It's going quite well, actually. Thank you. I'm really glad we got to talk. Thank you for offering your time. But before we even get started, I just saw there was a big announcement that had to do with the National Wrestling Alliance. Would you care to share any information on it?
Sure. This kind of broke today, a little earlier than I think we even planned on it coming out. But there is a big concert, big music festival that'll be happening in Mexico City. It's called the World is a Vampire Festival. The headlining act will be the Smashing Pumpkins. There's a number of other musical acts as well. Also, part of that festival will be the National Wrestling Alliance versus AAA. Still trying to work out the details on exactly how people would be able to enjoy that, stateside, whether it would be a pay-per-view or if it would something we would stream on our YouTube channel or through FITE, or if it would even be streamed at all. Maybe it's something that we could just, keep for the 50,000 fans that are going to be in a soccer stadium. So it's still being worked out as to exactly how everything's going to work out and who's going to be on the show. And but it's kind of showing that, the international reach that the National Wrestling Alliance has. And I mean, people have seen that, for decades, and the relationships that the NWA, it says National Wrestling Alliance, but when you take a look at all the different territories internationally and the relationships that the NWA has had, particularly with Japan, and then a lot of other territory areas, you could say, in Europe, and the history that has to go along with that. And of course, in Mexico as well. So there's a long history of, cooperation and fun that we have with our friends over at AAA, and for us to be able to put on a show in Mexico City coming up this March. I'm very excited for it. I'm excited to see how this is going to roll out and exactly all the big announcements that'll be made there as NWA takes on AAA. So it'll be kind of interesting to just kind of go into their hometown, into their territory, and see what kind of wrestling we could put together for it. So a lot of things are still in play as far as the details on how it's all going to work out. But if you follow the NWA on social media, we'll probably be having a series of live announcements, leading up to that. But I mean, even before then, we're having our first live power at the end of January, and we're going to have a pay-per-view in February as well. So we've got a lot of big shows coming up to kickstart the 2023 for the NWA.
And that's very cool too. The Mexico show, fantastic. Very interested in how that'll play out, because it's always fun when you see a show go out of its comfort zone, so to speak. And you'll get that occasionally. You'll have these major events happen either out of the country or a unique venue, and it's always stand out when it happens. And more information will definitely be great. What was that about the live power? How is that going to be? If you could speak on that, please.
Well, yeah, we've done power, for a number of years at this point, but we've never done one that broadcast live, and it would probably most likely be live through FITE TV, FITE TV Plus, and most likely also our YouTube channel simultaneously. It'll be coming to you from the Knoxville Convention Center, which folks may remember is where we had our Always Ready pay-per-view. So we already kind of have the lay of the land for how exactly things can work in that venue. We know that we can bring in a large crowd from that area. And, there was a lot of people that told us, it's hard to run East Tennessee. East Tennessee is hard to run. It's I don't know if you're going to be able to get people. And we filled that convention center. Smoky Mountain ran out of Knoxville for a long race. So I don't know why there was so much hesitation from a lot of people as to why we picked that as a place for a pay-per-view. But you've got a lot of people out there that are big NWA fans and people that are willing to travel from all over Tennessee and those surrounding states. And so we're going back there, and we know it's going to be a real fun opportunity for us, because not only will you see an episode of Power Live, but we're going to put a couple of episodes in the bag as well, and you'll see those on the upcoming weeks just before our February pay-per-view. So it's an exciting time that we're being able to do something. It's not something that, we get a lot of comparisons to the big billionaire players out there with WWE and AEW, and we're not in that conversation really when it comes to having a daily, or not daily, but a weekly live television broadcast. Not to say that that's not something that won't be in the cards within the next few months or the next couple of years, but this will be kind of a nice opportunity to kind of give our fans something that, we know works really well. We do our live pre-shows for our pay-per-views on our YouTube channel. And those do incredibly well. And there's a lot of good conversation that comes from those pre-shows that we have, along with the live pay-per-views that we do on FITE TV. So we know that everybody in the world right now, it's really hard to get consistent fans that want to tune into something unless it is live. And that goes for not just wrestling, but even if you look at things like the World Cup that's happening right now, the majority of people tuning in are tuning in as it happens. Even if that means, if you live on the West Coast of the United States, you're getting up at 8:30 in the morning to watch a football game or a soccer game for that matter. It's the world that we live in, and it's the world that we have to adapt to. And actually, I'm excited for it. I think we do our best broadcasts when we know that it's live. And honestly, when we do our tapings for NWA Power and NWA USA, we do them as if it is live. We've never run it back and like had a match that was taped and thought in an hour later, let's do that match over again. We've never done that. We've always had it as a live experience for the crowd that's there, and also for us and as performers, and as far as our production goes. And I think that having that pressure there to make sure that people understand that we take this just as seriously as all the other big billionaire players that do this on twice a week live or something like that. So it's exciting. It's exciting that we're finally being able to do that. And we're going to do it out of a place that we know that we've got a nice core fan group. Joe Kazana, who's been promoting professional wrestling in the Knoxville area for, he's part of a dynasty of families that have been doing wrestling there. AJ Kazana, one of the wrestlers that's on our roster. But we know that he's going to bring a large number of fans in, and he's going to help us set up an incredible show. And we did it last time with Always Ready, and now we're going to do it again. Instead of a Saturday night, it'll be a Tuesday night. So I'm happy for that.
Yeah, no, definitely fantastic. And there is something to be said about an underserved market, right? You talked about how, everyone says that area is so tough to draw in, and maybe, you guys can take advantage, you have taken advantage of it by going to an area that people tend to avoid, and fans are going to be desperate for the action.
I don't know if it's that. I think, with the NWA, we have a really large contingent of people that go out of their way to travel and be at our shows. Mm-hmm. And whether they live in the Atlanta area or they live in Tennessee, or we have a fan now that flew all the way from Rio de Janeiro.
Wow.
To come to NWA, to come to New Orleans, come to our New Orleans pay-per-view, Hard Times 3. So we have these core groups of people that are willing to spend really thousands of dollars between airfare and meals and hotels and all the other stuff, because they want to see what we're doing. They're interested in our product, and they love our product, and they're, and I love them for that. And I think that's how we're going to be able to grow. And when we start looking at 2023, you're going to start seeing that we're going to be traveling to a lot of different markets that the NWA has not been to during the Lightning One era. We've got a lot of stuff in the works, and look at Mexico City as a big example of that. So there is a hunger for our brand and our style of professional wrestling, and we're gonna go to those places where those people are. And if you want to travel with us and you want to come on and hop on a plane and come to the show, the only thing I can guarantee you is you're going to be able to see some fantastic wrestling.
No, definitely, absolutely. And there's a few things I really want to get to, but first and foremost, everybody check out National Wrestling Alliance on YouTube, on FITE, on Twitter. Where else can they see National Wrestling Alliance content?
Well, that's where we are right now. And, we love being on FITE. They've been a great partner with us, especially as a pay-per-view provider, but also through our subscription service, giving people early access to NWA Power, and then, people being able to catch those replays on YouTube. But we also have seen an enormous growth on our YouTube channel as well. So there's definitely a lot of people out there that are still interested in the NWA, and they're sharing it, which is so important these days, especially when you're going to be on an internet broadcast platform. So you have to be able to have that. And it's exciting to see that we're growing and look at all the strides that we're able to make and the revenue we're able to bring in. At the end of the day, I mean, you can't run a company in the red for very long. And it's great that we're not. We're in a position where we're making money and we're filling up these arenas, and we can, afford to get some, nicer things to add to the accoutrement and maybe bring in some new talent and sign talent to longer talent agreements and things like that. So it's great seeing the success that we're having right now. I think the cornerstone of that is our fans. And the other major part of that is, the core group of people that have dedicated their lives to making the NWA successful every single day. People like Billy Corgan, of course, Kyle Davis, Pat Kenny, head of talent relations, and myself, along with, a lot of other people that, are pretty consistent. Gary Horn working on our social media team, Diana as well. And there's a lot of different people out there I could name drop all day of our core group that's constantly working to make the NWA a success. And I think our dedication is paying off at this point. And you could see that in just the announcements being made today that we're, going international.
No, that's fantastic. And you brought up an interesting point, because Billy Corgan is definitely the head figure for the National Wrestling Alliance. But obviously it takes a village for things to become a success. What is your role? Because a lot of people might just know your role as the commentator, the play-by-play commentator that does a great job week in and week out. What is your current role, and has that evolved from the beginning?
Oh yeah, it definitely has. It's interesting you brought that up, because for just up until a few weeks ago, I never really had a title, and it really wasn't important to me. In wrestling parlance, you just want to be in the office. I'm in the office. I'm part of the office. And so that was fine with me. But I guess, when we start doing these other things and we start reaching out to different entities out there as far as production and broadcasting and different things, like you need to have a title at the bottom of your signature on an email. So at this point, I am the COO of the National Wrestling Alliance, so Chief Operations Officer. So it's interesting that I'm an executive, which is always fun. When I first started on in this role, I would just tell people I was an EVP, because most wrestling people get that because of the position that the Bucks and Omega have or had, or I don't know what it really is.
Whatever that is.
Whatever it is right now. But at least people understood it. So that's my official title. And so like every day is answering emails, doing Zoom calls, making deals, booking venues. And it's kind of a whole different thing there of doing that. And then on top of that, also, merging into the music realm of the Billy Corgan universe and being a co-host for 33 with William Patrick Corgan, which is the podcast that we do weekly that features a world premiere of a new Smashing Pumpkin song every week, which is part of their new concept album, Autumn. So if you're a music fan, I urge you to check it out, because it's pretty cool. And so it's a lot. But I'm really used to that level of work and dedication that it takes to be able to run essentially a small business this way, because of the decade that I spent doing broadcast journalism. And anybody who's, worked in the grind of local cable news, anything like that, knows that, sun up to sundown, and even times at night, I mean, the phone's always on, the emails are going out, the texts are going out, you're reaching out to sources, and it never stops. And, just because you have one story that airs, on Monday at 5, well, you need something else to air at 6, and then you need something else to air at 10, and then you need something for the next day. And so it's this constant meat grinder of work, which I think is a lot of reasons why a lot of people turned away from that as a career, and why I was lucky enough to be able to turn away from it from a career. I'm grateful for the time that I spent doing broadcast news. I think if I wasn't in that position, in that career field, I probably wouldn't be in the position that I am in wrestling right now. So I'm very fortunate to be where I'm at, and being the COO of National Wrestling Alliance. I mean, if that's something, if you would have told 13-year-old Joe Galli, who went over to his friend's house because his mom was willing to get WrestleMania on pay-per-view, and she was also going to cook a mean baked ziti, and you would have told him like, hey, you're going to be an executive of a televised wrestling company when you're in your 30s, I would have said you're nuts. So it's pretty cool. I'm very blessed to be in this. As we record this, it's Thanksgiving, or just the Thanksgiving Eve, and so I'm feeling very thankful to be in the position that I'm in.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. And this is very cool. And thank you for shedding some light on that. You made an interesting point where you brought up, the similarities and how that almost prepared you for wrestling, because there's definitely entertainment in general, not just professional wrestling. It never stops. There's always news breaking. There's good parts, there's bad parts, but there's always a conversation. There's always people striving for more. So I can definitely see the comparison and how it kind of preps you for that. What made you get into news and everything like that?
I accidentally fell into it. It's really bizarre because, I know so many people that like from the time they were a child, they idolized, the anchor at their 5 o'clock, news, and or they had family that were into it. So it's been so ingrained in them where I never really had that. I was going to college at California State University, Northridge, and I was kind of listless there. And I was in a program to get a degree in screenwriting, which would have probably done nothing for me. But that's what I was interested in. I was really into writing. And the film program at Cal State Northridge, at least at the time I was there, and I have to imagine it is still to this day, is very intense. It's a college that's in Los Angeles. It's a stone's throw from Hollywood. So if you're going to have a film program there, it's going to be hardcore. And at the time, I couldn't do that, work full time, and also be in wrestling at the same time. There was just too much in my life going on, and I just couldn't make the classes. And in that same building was the broadcast journalism department, and I decided to switch majors based on the schedule for classes. And so it was just kind of like a convenience factor of like, I can't spend, an extra year going to college because I can't make time to go to these film classes. And so I made that transition. And at the time, I really didn't take it too seriously. I was in this mindset, and I think a lot of people kind of get stuck in. And I think it's a big reason why so many of us, especially in my generation, are in such high student loan debt, where you get indoctrinated that you must have a degree. It doesn't matter that what the degree is, just get the degree. And that was kind of drilled into me. And so I was like, I just need to get this. But at the same time, there was a kind of a freeing effect with it, because I knew, I wasn't going to try to get my master's degree. I didn't think I was going to get a job in news. So I was really free to just kind of be creative and kind of ridiculous, to be honest. And so one of the last things you do when you're getting your broadcast journalism bachelor degree is you make a demo reel. And, it's just a series of stand-ups that you would see a reporter do. And for the most part, people try to emulate what they see on TV. So they stand in front of, the Walmart. And it's Black Friday, and, economic forecast says this, that, and the other thing. And then, if you were smart, you would go into Home Depot and get a thing of caution tape and put it between two trees at the park and pretend you're at a crime scene. And it's like, police are still looking for the suspect involved in a double murder here in Balboa Park. But mine, because I was also in wrestling at the time, I started mine where I was doing a stand-up in the ring, and I take a Death Valley driver from my trainer at the time, who was Brawlin' Bo Cooper, who I believe is still wrestling in the Simi Valley area, if you want to go see him as part of MTW. And so I made this really ridiculous demo reel where I took a slam in the ring and did some other stupid stuff. And there just happened to be a guy who was, advising. I'm trying to think of the word now. It is he was trying to help a TV station in Toledo, Ohio, and they were looking for someone who was out of the box. And so they're like, well, my professor at the time was like, hey, I know this guy. You want to send him your demo reel because they're looking for somebody doing wacky shit. And so I sent them everything, and they hired me. Sight unseen, and I packed up my little Ford Focus and I drove from Los Angeles to Toledo, Ohio, to start my career, in broadcast news. And at the time, I thought I was just going to be, wacky morning reporter, like, hey, it's National Pancake Day. We're at the old pancake house. I want to make a 4-foot wide pancake and see if I can eat it in an hour. Like that kind of stuff. But then quickly, the news director got switched out, and it's like, no, we do news here. So you're going to have to go do news. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll do that now. And so I just kind of fell into it, and I started doing it. And it was kind of freeing because I liked this, like, there's a level of creativity that comes with it, you're always writing, you're always talking to people, you're always doing kind of cool stuff, granted, there are days when you're doing really horrible things, meaning, you got to cover a child that died, or, some other thing like that. But then you get to cover, giant acts of nature, big blizzards, hurricanes, forest fires, house fires, big things where your adrenaline's pumping. And as terrible as they are, when you're running out to a mass casualty event, which I've covered way too many mass shootings, but there is sort of an adrenaline rush that comes with that sort of stuff when you're heading to breaking news. And so I kind of got hooked into that. And I actually really did enjoy it. And I found it, really rewarding. It's the whole reason I can call myself an Emmy Award winner, because I won a regional Emmy when I was in Palm Springs covering wildfires there. So it gave me a lot, and it also kind of, helped me be the broadcaster that I am today for the National Wrestling Alliance. And so, Ken, when I have you or other people come up to me and say, hey, I like you as the broadcaster that you are for the NWA, there's no way that I would have grown into that without spending that decade grinding it out in local news.
That's so cool, is how it prepared you for what you kind of wanted to do, but you didn't know you wanted to do. And we'll get into wrestling momentarily, but I'm curious about two things. One is, there is a similarity, again, with what you were doing in wrestling, where you were traveling a lot. You were going from territory to different, locations, not just locations on set, but you were working for different companies and different news. So I like that comparison. But another thing is, were you just on location, or were you also like an inset anchor, or was it both?
I would fill in to anchor on occasion. I never saw myself in that position, because you have to keep in mind, what you don't see is the egos and everything that comes along with television news. I mean, it's just like any other television. Everybody wants that spot. Everybody wants that main anchor spot. And it can be pretty cutthroat when you've got a lot of journalists out there that are all kind of vying for that spot. And so I just never really saw myself doing that. And then the other part of it is there's, you got to pay your dues, whether it's in news or it's in wrestling or anything in the world. You can be an investment banker. You got to pay your dues. And part of paying your dues to be an anchor on a desk is usually you're going to end up working weekends and doing the weekend news for an extended period of time. It could be a couple of years. It could be a decade. Who knows? And that would have made it impossible for me to also do anything in wrestling, because wrestling is a Saturday, Sunday thing. With the exception of our new live power on a Tuesday night, and what the bigwigs do, Monday Night Raw, Friday Night SmackDown. But if you're working independent wrestling, it's Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, and that's pretty much it. So if I was also anchoring those days, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I kind of forced myself to be in a position to where I pretty much always worked Monday through Friday, which means I'm not sitting at the anchor desk. So that was a trade I was more than willing to make, because, I was having fun doing wrestling. It was my passion. It was, and I found it so much more rewarding to do that. So, I was willing to make that career choice instead of really fighting. Because I'm sure that if I would have got the degree and got some job, covering, local news in Harlingen, Texas for a while, and you work your way up, and it's pretty much everyone else's story in local news is, they got a degree and they got a job in some small market somewhere, maybe Santa Barbara, and then you get a job in Sacramento, and then you get a job in San Francisco, and that's just kind of, you work your way up in the market system if you're a good journalist. So that's just one way. That's the traditional path. And I did not take the traditional path, and I'm so glad I didn't. Because I think I'm much happier now doing what I'm doing now, as opposed to being, the main reporter for the Fox affiliate in Orlando, Florida. You know what I mean? So I'm much happier doing this and being able to talk to guys like you, Ken.
And I very much appreciate you making time. Now, that's kind of what this channel is all about. Sharing our stories, telling the stories of those involved in wrestling, and sharing our love for wrestling. Because let's face it, there's a lot of negativity, but in the end, pro wrestling is what drives so many of us. So many of us have dedicated our lives to it, grew up loving it. Some have had careers, some just lifelong fans. I don't think there's enough love being told for wrestling. And I think social media is a great place for wrestling, but it can also really spike the negativity at times. So I just like to spread some more positivity. And with that, I want to know, what made you first fall in love with wrestling? Do you know when you first started watching? And who was your favorite growing up?
Well, it's interesting. Like everybody else is, you fall in love with what you're first watching on TV. When I was younger, I went to Catholic school, and where I lived and where the school was were very, very different neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And so the school neighborhood was quite affluent, actually. And so a lot of my friends and peers there were pretty well to do. And you have to keep in mind the time that we're talking about here. Like, I didn't have cable, and a lot of my friends did. And so, like, they were all watching Raw on the USA Network and stuff, and watching WCW, and I just didn't have that as an option because, like, we just didn't have it in the house. We just had over the air. We had the old rabbit ears and the antenna on the roof. But then WWE moved to UPN. With SmackDown. The first episodes of SmackDown were on a defunct channel, which was UPN, which was before it moved to Fox. And so that's when I first started to be able to kind of watch wrestling. And so I remember those nights, because all my friends would talk about all this cool stuff. And I was like, I want to see what this is about. And so I was kind of hooked on it there. And I was just laying down in the living room while my dad's falling asleep on the couch, and I'm watching SmackDown. And so that was kind of my first, introduction into it. And so all the Attitude Era guys are the first, people that I, fell in love with, The Rock, Stone Cold, Mankind, The Undertaker, Kane. I was a huge Kane fan when I was a kid. Loved Kane. So, that was my first, foray into it. And then, after that, my mom eventually did get cable, and then, I'm going to high school and my friends are also into wrestling. We're, doing odd jobs and putting money together to go get pay-per-views and watch them over at Brandon Taylor's house. And, so that was kind of like my introduction and how I kind of fell in love with it. And, it really also had to do with like the core friend group that I had, because they were all into it. And it's like, well, these are what my friends are into, so I'll be into it. And, never did I imagine that of that core friend group, I become an executive with the NWA. Brandon from high school, he now works for the New Japan LA dojo. And Mark Donica, who is back working with NXT. So of that core friend group, you had 3 people who moved on to go and make careers out of the sport of wrestling, which is it's got to be unprecedented. It's got to be weird to just have these 3 kids who, at certain points did what they tell you not to do, the backyard wrestling. We were getting those old DVDs and tapes of all that stuff that, doing stuff you really shouldn't be doing. And then, of course, you do it and people get, knocked unconscious doing stupid bumps in a public park. But, it's how a lot of people grew up and how they kind of tried to immerse themselves into wrestling without really knowing what they're doing. And so that's how I kind of fell in love with it.
That's the funny thing about backyard wrestling is you're always told not to do it, and people always end up eventually looking down on it. But when you're a kid, everybody does it. You can't help it.
It's the same thing when you look at any sort of extreme sports, because at the same time, you got kids out there that are watching X Games and they're seeing, everything Tony Hawk's doing, and everybody's getting a skateboard or a BMX bike. And those are inherently dangerous as well. You're going to end up with broken bones and things like that. And will it pay off? Are you going to be an Olympic gold medalist in snowboard? Probably not. But, at the same time, it's like, I'm probably never going to be NWA World Heavyweight Champion either, but you could still find a space.
Plus, there's different degrees of it too, of course. Sometimes it's just a couple friends wrestling around, then there's more extreme versions of it too. So, it is what it is. So, something I didn't actually know until I was doing research, and you mentioned it before, is you actually trained and did go on to wrestle. Could you talk about when you decided to start training to wrestle and how that happened and more information on your training?
Sure. so my friend Brandon Taylor, who I mentioned before, currently wrestles under the name Robert Baines. He's going to be the best man at my wedding. You know, his best friend going to high school and stuff. And, you know, we're out of high school, and this really kind of puts a date on where we are. He found an ad in a physical newspaper, the Daily News in Los Angeles. And in the classified section, there was just an ad for a wrestling school that came with a, you know, buy one, get one free coupon for the first wrestling class. And he really wanted to do it. And I was like, I don't know. And I was like, okay, I'll go. It'll be fun. It'll be something to do. And at the time, I was not an athletic person. I never did sports in high school. I was like a theater kid. Like, I just never, I was doughy in all like the wrong places with skinny arms, and like nothing really was there. But I went to that first training seminar at makemeaprowrestler.com, a now defunct school. But I just got kind of addicted. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, you never want to do that first bump of cocaine, because then you might just get addicted for the rest of your life. And that's what did it for me. You know, and then I just started training there like 3-4 days a week and grinding out. I had some phenomenal trainers. Ryan Katz, who currently works in the production with NXT, Dan Magnus, Jesus Rodriguez, Brawlin Bo Cooper, Rocky Romero. You know, there's a lot of people who came through and helped, you know, start that career in pro wrestling. And then, of course, you know, you just work, you know, little tiny indie shows in the LA area, you know, little places in front of 40 people. And I kind of always thought like that was probably going to be the extent of it. You know, I never thought like as hard as I worked out and all this other sort of stuff, like I never thought that I would be able to be one of those guys, you know. And at this point, you know, you're watching ROH and things like that. And it's like, oh man, I'm never going to be as good as, you know, Colt Cabana or like, you know, or these Young Buck guys that are coming up and they're main eventing this indie show that I'm working the first match, you know, and I'm just getting squashed by, you know, Bo Cooper or something. So, but yeah, so I did that for a number of years and I had a great time doing it. And then I think that that's kind of what's important. And I think that's what makes it, what also helps me be really successful as a commentator for it is because it helps so much if you've done it. And you could really tell it with other sports as well. Like the guys who played baseball at a high level and then moved on to broadcasting, even if they're the play-by-play guy and not a color commentator for it. I don't know if if it's you respect the business more, or you could kind of see how things are going to operate. It makes it better to be able to tell the story because you're so much more familiar with it.
I feel like I feel like that might be tenfold with professional wrestling too, because there is the physical aspect of it, but there's also the psychological aspect of it, where you can understand the story they're trying to tell a lot better because you have a better knowledge of the fundamentals that go on with the storytelling.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think WWE sometimes struggles, is because they will kind of hire somebody. You know, recently there was a big shakeup there, and I forget the guy that they were, you know, had doing Raw, who was like an MMA guy and kind of things like that. And you could tell that they're kind of learning wrestling on the fly. And wrestling fans see right through that. I mean, because, you know, wrestling fans know all the terminology, they know all the history, they know all this sort of stuff, and they'll just tear you to shreds on Twitter. So it helps to really be able to have that understanding of it, and, you know, be able to tell a wrist lock from a wristwatch, you know. So so that really, I think it helped me as well when I was really breaking into the broadcast side of the business.
So I have to ask, do you remember your first match, who it was with and where it was at?
No clue. It was probably against Brandon. When he was wrestling as the Hobo.
See, and it's interesting you bring him up because I know his work from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood primarily, but and then I saw him as the Hobo before he developed into Baines. But the first time I saw him wasn't as the Hobo or Robert Baines. It was on a show called Rhett and Link's Commercial Kings, where he was given the special gimmick of the baby, which
I was there for that shoot.
Oh, you were there for that shoot?
I think I'm on that episode. I can't remember.
Now I'll need to go back and watch.
I really have a very poor memory when it comes to that sort of thing. And, guys will come up to me, whether it's, Peter Avalon, who I or, especially in my early days when I would do broadcasting for Championship Wrestling from Hollywood and all these great things that would happen, or Championship Wrestling from Arizona. It's just things that I just completely forgot that other people seem to remember. And then I was like, then they bring it up and it's really great. And the Rhett and Link thing is another good example of that, where he was the baby. And that was really entertaining. And they made something really fun with it.
Yeah, those guys are hilarious. And it was great.
And see, that's the other great thing when you're going to a wrestling school in a place that in Los Angeles specifically, you're gonna get other opportunities that I don't think a lot of people will, just because of where it is. And a lot of people wrestling is always a draw, and everybody wants to try it. And you can get on shows like that. And I knew so many people who were able to have independent wrestling, but also do kind of fun things that were sort of wrestling adjacent, whether it was, back in the day when the Man Show was a show and they wanted to do a pro wrestling bit, there were guys that I knew that were on that, that bit. So it's kind of a blessing to be, in the Los Angeles area coming up, because you'll get to be able to get exposure from a lot of these random things. And it might be really different now because, social media and everybody can get shared everywhere, and you don't have to be anywhere in particular to get over. One of the guys that I know here in the San Antonio area, Luigi Primo, I mean, he had a fantastic run for several weeks. He was the guy with the pizza dough.
Yeah.
And got super over with that. And he's been doing that for years, and it just happened to hit at the right place at the right time, and it got him a spot on AEW for a few weeks. So, it just kind of shows how the nature of the beast has evolved, and how things have diversified as far as not all entertainment needs to come from Los Angeles.
Absolutely. I mean, there was always LA, New York, maybe some of Florida, but it's definitely expanding in that way. You brought up I brought up Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. You brought up Arizona. When was your first time meeting David Marquez?
Oh boy. I had just taken a job as a reporter in Palm Springs. And I might have met him ancillarily when I was first training to be a pro wrestler, but even in my mind, when I was first coming up in the business, there's no way that I'm going to be good enough to wrestle on Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. So I never and even Dave pulled me aside once. It's like, why'd you ever try to work here? And I was like, because I never thought I was good enough to. But when several years after the fact there, I'm working in Palm Springs, and Brandon Taylor, again, wrestling as the Hobo, is the Heritage Champion there. And this was at the same time when Todd Kennelly, who I think currently calls Hollywood matches now, he went back to it, but he got a job with TNA Impact, and he was going to, go and call those. So they needed a broadcaster. And Brandon said, why don't you come out and try? And I was like, okay. And so I made that, 4-hour drive from Palm Springs to Port Hueneme. And the first show I went was a Red Carpet Rumble taping, which is their big, version of the Royal Rumble. It's the biggest show of the year for Hollywood. And so I didn't get to sit in. So Todd Kennelly, that was kind of his go-home show. So I kind of just was in the back. I did a couple backstage interviews and stuff. But Dave Marquez also comes from a broadcast background. He came from local news, things like that. So he liked that I came from that world as well. And we kind of spoke a language together, as that, brothers that have worked in that sort of world and knew understood the workings of a live truck and doing all these different things. And so the next set of tapings, they just put me in the chair and they said, you're calling it. I was like, oh, and I really wasn't expecting it at the time. I thought I was probably just going to do backstage stuff or whatever. And so it was me and Johnny LaQuasto for a number of years, calling Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, and then eventually Championship Wrestling from Arizona. And, that really kind of set the foundation for what I am today as a broadcaster.
I'm glad you brought up Johnny LaQuasto because, quick little plug, we are interviewing him either Friday or sometime next week on this very channel. So just had to plug that real quick.
He's fantastic. He's one of the best in the business. I love seeing that he is so active. It's hard when you get let go by WWE, but I mean, he is just firing on all cylinders. He's got a beautiful fiance, or perhaps a wife in his life at this point. And he's doing all kinds of voiceover work, and he's doing MMA matches, and he's calling wrestling all over the place. I couldn't say more nice things about Johnny LaQuasto. I mean, he's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I thought he was very underrated. You know, him, Nigel McGuinness, Aiden English, I thought was a really quality group on like 205 Live and stuff like that. So
I agree. I agree. And it's one of those things. And then you see, you know, I think Aiden English is still at it. You know, I think he's moved over to Impact, and like, so, you know, and of course, you know, Nigel's just underrated, period.
The fact his Ring of Honor run, amazing. Yeah. I'll never be able to grow tired of it.
The fact that so many, you know, wrestling fans, especially newer ones, don't know more about Nigel McGuinness is a sin. But I love working with Johnny, and I think we kind of bounced off each other. I think it was kind of a stranger dynamic because we kind of were both professional broadcaster side, and it wasn't, here's the play-by-play person and here's the color person, you know, who was the wrestler who's now moved into that broadcast position. You know, somebody like Taz or King or Tim Storm or Velvet Sky for that matter. So there was kind of that dynamic, but we had really good chemistry. And he's a funny guy. He's a stand-up comedian, and he cracked me up all the time. And so, and he also had a really good knowledge of the body, being a physical therapist, and he knew exactly what technical terms for muscles.
So he wasn't doing Gorilla Monsoonisms there? No,
he was not, but he had his own style. And that's what led him to eventually be working for the WWE. And so, and he's been able to have that translate into a fantastic career as a broadcaster. And I couldn't be happier. And I'm glad you're going to get a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting. Okay, let's move on. Billy Corgan. You know, he's obviously a major musician, but he's been either a fan of wrestling or involved with wrestling and for a long time now, since the 90s, right? Because that's when he was hanging around ECW. And when did you first meet him, and how did the NWA opportunity come about?
Well, going back, you know, all roads lead back to Dave Marquez. So I was calling Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. Billy had just bought the NWA, and he wanted to bring it back, and they were starting the 10 Pounds of Gold series with Nick Aldis and then Tim Storm, who was the champion at the time. But Billy knew that he wanted to be able to go someplace where he could get quality looking television out of it. You could say a lot of things about Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, but if you watch it, it is top tier as far as the production goes. Dave knows what he's doing. He's got the camera set up. It looks great. And that's what attracted Billy to that spot, to bring Tim Storm in. And I believe the first match that I called, you know, quote unquote, for the NWA was Tim Storm versus Zicky Dice. And it was during that set of tapings that Billy pulled me into the hallway. And, you know, I mentioned before that I have a hard time remembering certain things, you know, things that should be major milestones. This one I do firmly remember. He pulls me into the hallway after the taping and goes, "Hey, I'm really serious about the NWA. This is going to really go places. I'm, you know, we're going full steam ahead, and I want you to be the commentator. I want you to be the voice of the NWA." And I was like, okay. Because, you know, you get told so many different things, you know, in wrestling, especially especially in television.
The billionaire backer starting a wrestling promotion has been a thing for.
Yeah, here's the thing, and it's all this stuff. And I was like, but, you know, I've learned that the best things to happen in my life is when you just say yes to stuff. And so I just said, yeah, cool, sounds great. Yeah, I'm like, here's my phone number, call me whenever you want. And then it just kind of started. And then I just was on NWA programming. I was calling pay-per-views. And then when we started Power, you know, it was, you know, me and Jim Cornette calling NWA Power. And so it was like really, it really opened the door for me to work for this company. So at this point, you know, me and Tim Storm are the two longest running employees of the Lightning One era, I guess you could say, that are still there. So that's pretty cool that I've, you know, been a part of this brand for so long, and basically since it kind of came to fruition in that Lightning One era. So it's, it's been a part of my life for half a decade almost at this point, and that's really cool.
I mean, you are the face of, or the voice of the NWA for the
Oh,
past
don't make me the
half decade.
face. Oh, we'll
The
never
voice,
sell tickets.
The voice.
We'll never sell tickets.
Okay, Velvet can be the face. You can be
Velvet
the
can
voice.
be, honestly, who should be the really the face, and I don't know why this is even up for discussion at this point. It has to be Kamille.
Oh, yeah.
She's been a champ
Absolutely.
for 500 plus days.
Absolutely.
And if you're going to have a face, it might as well be Kamille.
And just on a side tangent, the way she's evolved her game from the beginning of her time with the NWA, where, she was just the quiet, imposing figure, and then she started wrestling, and the quality of her matches, how much better they've gotten. Like, she's awesome. She's awesome.
She's a beast. She's a beast. She's a top level athlete. She's been like that her entire life, and then being completely focused in the sport of professional wrestling. It's great, and I love working with her. And like you said, she gets. There's a reason why the NWA is going to AAA in March. Well, Kamille went there first to wrestle Ty Valkyrie, so
yeah,
there's a reason for that.
Great. Now you did bring up a interesting name, someone who's very controversial in wrestling, but they're also very knowledgeable and have a long history. Jim Cornette. Now you didn't get to work with him particularly long, but you did work with him for. Was it just one? No, it was more than one taping, wasn't it?
I think it was 2 seasons. I think we got 2 seasons.
Okay. How was that? How were your interactions with him personally? And you don't necessarily have to talk about the exit, but just your time with him in the NWA.
I have to say, as anybody who listens to one of his many podcasts or anything like that, you understand the encyclopedia that Jim Cornette is when it comes to professional wrestling.
So knowledgeable.
It's super undeniable. And then his amount of recall, I am super jealous of. The things he's remembered and the experiences that he's had and the expertise that he's had and the different hats that he's worn in pro wrestling, I find so fascinating. And to me, in working with him, he was incredibly generous with his time. He was so fun to work with. He was cracking me up all the time. And even like when we weren't broadcasting, it was one of those things where he was always willing to get an email from me, give me advice, and do things like that. So, Jim's a controversial figure, and so people shouldn't be surprised when he says controversial things, because that's what he does. That is the entire essence of what he is. But as far as, a broadcast partner and a guy I got to work with, I feel like I learned a lot working with Jim. And I'm honestly very fortunate that I was in that position and I got to do something that, at this point, I don't think anyone else is ever going to get a chance to do. It doesn't seem like he has any interest getting back into working in the wrestling industry. So to be a part of that, his big career, small part of as it was, I'm very fortunate of. And yeah, so I feel like I learned a lot from him, and I feel like a lot of people have. He's got 2 big podcasts, the hundreds of thousands of listeners. I feel like everybody's learning something from Jim Cornette.
I think it's important to state because, again, there is all the controversy, and he does say controversial things, but his career was incredible. The Midnight Express and his work there was next level, and a fun full circle moment. You talked about SmackDown making you a fan. He was the color commentator on the first episode of SmackDown. So
yeah. I mean, how crazy is that? I remember, that's another one of those things where I do remember that episode and laying down on the living room floor and watching that episode. And I just bring it up. That's very interesting that Jim Cornette was the color commentator. And then, fast forward, I'm ended up, sitting next to him calling wrestling. So, wow, what a world.
Very cool.
Life. It's crazy.
Now, once he was gone, Stu Bennett, aka Wade Barrett, who now does NXT, he was the replacement. What was it like, A, shifting to a new commentator so quickly, and B, working with Stu, who at that point I think only had World of Sport experience on commentary? I'm not sure.
It's interesting because I remember, and it was so strange to me that Stu, that first episode, he was really nervous about it, and he was really nervous that he wasn't going to do well.
Really?
And I had to be like, "You're gonna be fine. What are you? You'll be fine. Relax." Like it was really weird. And then he was immediately, and we had really good chemistry together. And I feel like that's another good thing with me in particular is I have worked with very few people that I don't have good chemistry with. Very adaptable to different personas and different styles in which other people are going to be color commentators. And so whether it was at Hollywood or Championship Wrestling from Arizona or in the NWA or many of the small, like, independent stuff that I still, call matches for RCW here in San Antonio, or I popped into Mission Pro Wrestling a couple of times. And so I get to work with a wide variety of people. And so far it's been, pretty universal that I have really good chemistry, but Stu especially, he was so good and so knowledgeable and so fun to be around, just a fun guy. And that's the other thing too, is like, you don't understand how much fun, we're having at that desk. I think, as you're watching this, the NWA USA taping, that's going to air this Saturday, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, or as we're recording this, I should say. So that taping, you can hear when we first start the show, this cackling of laughter that's coming from our broadcast team, because we're having a really good time, and we're, honestly cutting a lot of super inappropriate jokes that are not part of the broadcast, but it's fun to do them in between matches. And so you get to have that sort of fun, and to think that I got to have that sort of fun with the leader of the Nexus, and, and all that cool stuff was really dope. And, every single person that I work with, I feel like I learned something from. So Jim Cornette definitely is one of those people, but, Stu Bennett was also high on that list as well. And it's fantastic to see that he's been able to completely, transition that into basically, being the color commentator with NXT. I mean, he's there, he's good friends with Triple H.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an amazing spot for him to be in. And I feel like, what was able to open the door to that was his time here in the NWA. And I think that that's great. When I see people that are in the NWA, and then they get opportunities elsewhere, and they, grab the bull by the horns, put lightning in a bottle, whatever metaphor you want to make, I'm so happy for them. And I'm so proud of them. So when you take a look at people like Thunder Rosa or Stu Bennett or all those other people that have, Ricky Starks, people that have transitioned out and have found great success, or LA Knight for that matter, formerly Eli Drake, who I've known for years from the time he was working in Hollywood, under the name Sean Ricker. So it's really great. And then for people to be able to use that and to put themselves in a position to where you're in this business and you're providing for your family and you're having a great time. I mean, what's more to love? What's more to be thankful for?
Definitely. And he's fantastic. Now he's on SmackDown with Michael Cole, and we'll see how long that lasts. I don't know the situation with Pat, if he's going to come back and add to it, but either way, he's doing a fantastic job, and it's great to see.
Oh yeah, I love it. I love seeing that there. And nobody really deserves it more. I mean, former Intercontinental Champion, things like that. So I mean, I just, it's wonderful. And but I have to say, of all the different teams that I've worked with, the best team, bar none, is Tim and Velvet.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about both of them because Tim, he's fantastic on screen, whether it's in the ring. I'm very partial to his promos because of how real they are. He comes off as a humble, true individual who can also mess you up if he has to. And he's just so real.
Oh, yeah.
So real.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. And that was another one that where like Tim wasn't really sure how it was going to work out with him spending so many years in the ring and as a former world champion. But he's also, and people know this, his other career path is in education. And so him being a teacher and standing in front of a class and, talking to them about American history and civics and all that other sort of stuff. I mean, it's a kind of a natural fit to be also sitting there and talking about wrestling. And Velvet, I mean, she is so good. I mean, I encourage people to go back and, watch those times where, she's TNA Knockouts champion, and how fantastic she is as a professional wrestler.
The beautiful people were huge.
Oh yeah. Great. Angelina Love, who I love as part of the NWA roster as well. and just seeing them together and the relationship that they have and all that stuff. But Velvet, you know, coming into her own as a broadcaster and as a professional, and you know, we have so much fun. And then I also, what I like about it is it gives, you know, not just a female voice, which is super important in pro wrestling, and there really isn't enough of it. I think that there needs to be more of that. It shouldn't just be the backstage interviewer is a woman. I think that it's important, you know, to have that female voice on the commentary team, especially if you're going to have as many women's matches as the NWA does, or as the other companies do.
Absolutely. An added perspective.
Yeah, it's great. And I think from the audience, you have to understand, you know, yes, the audience for pro wrestling right now is skewed very much male, but at the same time, most people are watching the TV in their house, and in that household, there's going to be women that live there. So why not appeal your product to them as well? And I think that is changing. It's shifting a little bit. You kind of saw it with Beth in WWE, and things are shifting. And you know, even if you take a look at the World Cup that's happening right now, I happened to watch like the first couple of games. It just happened to be on TV, and I was delighted to hear that there were female commentators that were calling, you know, this soccer game for, you know, millions and millions of people. So I think that that's great that shift is happening in the industry, not just in wrestling, but also across all forms of sports, which I think is very, very important. And Velvet does a fantastic job. And on top of that, you know, we've got the rest of our broadcast team, you know, everyone works their ass off. And I can't tell you how proud I am to see May Valentine grow in the role that she's had as our backstage correspondent.
I feel like she's evolved on screen before our very eyes.
Absolutely. See, one of those things is like, I feel like May was coming in, you know, she's a rock and roll journalist who, you know, published author, you know, speaks multiple languages. But it definitely was a different world for May Valentine when she first stepped into it. And I feel like a lot of people gave her a lot of heat on social media for not being, you know, that type of what they thought of as the stereotypical backstage interviewer. But she has grown. She's found her own voice. She's really worked very hard at what she does. And at the heart of the matter, when you're being the backstage interviewer, what you're really being, whether it's kayfabe or not, is you're being a journalist, and you're asking questions to get answers for fans. That's your job. And she does that professionally, or she did that professionally. And so now she does that with us, and her voice is really elevated, and it's fantastic. I mean, just the how good she's gotten over the years with us, I can't understate how great it is. And then Kyle Davis on top of it too, it's fine. And Kyle Davis being our ring announcer and also doing those ringside interview segments. You know, Kyle had broadcast experience back in ROH, doing it there as well. And he's been absolutely phenomenal. And honestly, it would be a challenge to work in the NWA and do the backstage stuff that we do on the day-to-day without Kyle Davis doing what he does. So big props to Kyle as well.
Yeah, Kyle's great. And you brought up an interesting point too about, you know, she evolved over time, but sometimes I think people need to understand, if someone's just starting off, it's going to take time. Nobody's perfect right away. You know, nobody's perfect ever, but nobody's especially perfect right away. And by giving her the time and the avenue to grow, now she plays off people wonderfully. And it's fun to see how much better people get. And to me, that's part of the journey. That's part of the fun, is to seeing them evolve.
And I think that that's something that I don't know if Billy Corgan gets enough credit for, is he can really see the talent in people. And he sees it, you know, even where other people might not, is he somehow has this gift of being able to see that with people, whether that's in professional wrestling, in music, or in the broadcast side. He gets it. And that's why he was able to trust a guy like me. You know, Billy probably could have found someone else to fit that position and work in NWA, maybe somebody with a bigger Twitter following, or somebody who, you know, at the time I'm working in Palm Springs, which is market 147, he probably could have gone to any top 10 market and hired some guy who's working in a top station somewhere and move them over a sports guy or something like that. But he saw something in me, and I'm entirely super grateful for that. He saw something in May. He's seen something in a number of these athletes that you see, that, maybe weren't given the opportunities that they really deserve in other places. And all of these great people that we're seeing as really big stars in professional wrestling, whether they're with us now or they were with us in the past and they moved on to bigger and better things. He sees stuff in guys, like Trevor Murdoch, or guys like Colby Corino or Kerry Morton, or, or much of our women's division as well, Kenzie Page, and giving them an opportunity to shine in the NWA. Where it's really kind of it's much more, from what I understand, it's much more hands off than what you get working for a lot of these other companies, where you're really going to be dictated. These are the questions you ask, and these are the questions how you ask them, and these are the responses we want. Whereas with us, it's like, well, what story are we telling? Okay, go. And there's a lot of trust that's given into you as a professional, whether that's in the ring or outside of it.
There were two interesting things that I just thought of. One is, it takes a special eye to be able to see a talent, but it takes a really special eye to be able to see what could be, right? Seeing what is, not everybody can, but seeing what could be, that's difficult. And you have to be a special eye for talent to be able to pull that off.
I agree. And I think nobody really does that better than Billy Corgan right now, to be honest with you. And that's why we're in the position where we are. It's why we're probably going to be having a larger number of contracted talent coming in 2023. We're going to be doing more shows, and we're going to be offering, wrestling as it's meant to be. It's my little go home line when we go into the start of the show. And that's what it's all about. And
the other thing is, which I love about the NWA, especially like when it started, because it felt so different, and obviously it's continued to this day, there's a freedom to fail that I think other companies lack, which there's good reasons for it too, but there's a certain excitement when someone can go out there and maybe they won't do well, but maybe they'll knock it out of the park. And when everyone's kind of put into this bag of, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to say, and this is how you're going to say it, mm-hmm. It could be good, it could be bad, but it's probably going to be in the middle. Well, if you have the freedom to do what you want, it may not go well, but you may knock it out of the park.
Yeah, and it sets up incredible moments, and it gives people particular platforms to succeed. If you take a look at, those early promos on NWA Power from Thunder Rosa, I think that really helped expose a lot of people to what she was all about and help put her on the trajectory where she's the AEW World Women's Champion. The same could be said, for Eli Drake. One of my favorite promos that we ever did was when him and James Storm became tag team champions, and he came out on stage drunk on champagne, and it's the Shoes of a Champion promo, which people can find on YouTube, and it's hilarious. And that was all Sean. That was all Eli Drake. That was all him. That I think that the directive they got is, you're celebrating your win.
Mm-hmm. Go for it.
Give me 3 minutes.
That's great.
And I think that that's kind of how it needs to be. And I think that that's how you're really going to be able to find people that you can connect with. And there's certain people definitely that can work in ecosystems where they're given directly what they want, and they're able to execute that and be successful and still draw and still make emotional connections with fans. But I feel like it's much harder. If you could just be genuine and be yourself and be who you are, it actually makes the job a lot easier, and I think it makes for a better product.
That's the appeal of wrestling, right? You want authenticity, even though what you're watching in theory isn't authentic. You want to feel that authenticity.
It's the whole reason why people love MJF, because it's authentic, and that's why he's arguably the most over person in AEW.
Now, Joe, you've been very giving with your time, and I appreciate it. I just have a couple questions to ask, if that's okay, before we get out of here. Sure. I think we've been on for almost an hour, around an hour. Yeah. Nick Aldis,
Mhm.
He recently announced that he's departing the NWA, but he was, if for a long time, if anybody was the face of the NWA, it would definitely be Nick Aldis. Now, over time, that changed, of course, as it does with every company. Nobody's ever the guy forever. What was it like working with him? And do you just have any thoughts on his departure from the company?
I think you can't argue the importance of Nick Aldis in the Lightning One era. NWA World's Heavyweight Champion for 1,300 days. Had probably some of the best matches that I've ever called, to be honest. And really helped elevate the brand to where we are. I really feel bad that things went the way that they did. I think, Billy said everything that, from the side of the NWA that needed to be said. He said that on a previous interview on Busted Open, and people can, look that up. I feel bad that it had to go down that way as well. Nick was always good to me. And so I really do hope that wherever he ends up, he's successful and he continues to be the dealer, the national treasure. Because you can't argue with him, the talent that he brought and brings to, especially from a promo perspective or from a match perspective. I mean, from a physique perspective. So honestly, I wish it would have ended differently and not so strangely. But I wish him the best. And if all I can imagine is he's got something lined up. And as much as we say the NWA has big plans for 2023, I'm sure he has big plans for 2023 as well. So, I wish him the best, and I hope it all works out for him. And I'm just sorry the way it did, the way it all came out. Probably could have just been handled better for everybody. But at the end of the day, Ken, you're 100% right that the NWA, it owes a lot of the inroads that we made early on, thanks to the talent and the work that Nick Aldis put in, particularly when we go back before Power, when we're talking about the 10 pounds of gold. That series on YouTube helped launch things, and I'm grateful for the work that he did and everything that he put into being, a world champion in the way a world champion should look.
Definitely. And 2023 will hopefully be a huge year for the NWA and for him. If he ends up in WWE or wherever he goes, I'm sure he'll do great, and I'm sure the NWA will as well.
Yeah.
All right. So the last question, besides the future and the plugs at the end, Tyrus has made a lot of headlines lately, for good and for bad, as he became the new NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. Just basically, how do you feel about the company's direction with Tyrus as arguably the face? If Kamille isn't the face, it's probably Tyrus now. Yeah. How do you feel about the direction moving forward? And what do you think the future of the NWA looks like?
Well, if you just kind of look at the recent announcements that we were able to make, the future is very bright for the NWA, especially going into 2023. If it's going to be NWA versus AAA, I don't see how our World Heavyweight Champion isn't figured into that equation.
Absolutely.
And so you also have to keep in mind, I have found that and this might also be because of where I've lived in this world, or at least in this country, a large portion of dedicated independent wrestling fans, or maybe just wrestling fans in general, tend to be kind of left leaning when it comes to their politics. And Tyrus obviously isn't. But that being said, when he came out for Revolution Rumble in Chalmette, Louisiana, which is a, sort of a working class suburb of New Orleans, that building erupted. There were a lot of fans there that wanted to see Tyrus and wanted to cheer for Tyrus. On the other hand, there were plenty of people there that probably hate Tyrus, whether it's, because of what he did in the WWE, or the thoughts that he has and he puts into his book, or the things that he says on Fox News. But I think that that's great. Isn't that what we want in the sport of professional wrestling? I kind of see Tyrus as potentially, really, if you want to take it to wrestling parlance, you could see him as a heel. Well, don't you want to see the heel get beat up? That's the whole point. So if you want to boo him, he elicits an emotional reaction from people, and that's kind of all the job really is. And so you've got this guy who's worked incredibly hard, and comes from this lineage and this family that's so ingrained in the sport of professional wrestling, and for him to be the world heavyweight champion, it's one of those love it or hate it. He's there. He's the top of the mountaintop. And you also can't argue with the fact that I don't know what days particularly he's on Gutfeld, but when he is, he's there. And now he used to have the television championship on his shoulders. He now has the 10 pounds of gold, and that's in front of 2 million people a night. And that's double AEW's audience for Dynamite, for their main program. It rivals Raw. So the exposure that the company gets is I don't know. You couldn't pay for it. You couldn't pay for it in advertising dollars. You could, but you would lose a billionaire's money in that. But I don't think that's why Tyrus is the world champion. Tyrus is the world champion because he won the triple threat match. And I think that, the direction that we're going to be going in 2023, I think it suits him to be that guy that people are going to be chasing for and attempting to knock off the top of the mountain. And if you take a look at the entire faction as a whole, because you could just look at Tyrus as the world heavyweight champion, but you also have Jordan Clearwater as the television champion.
He's great, by the way.
I love Jordan to death. And you have Sion as the national champion.
Mm-hmm.
And they have 2 managers. You've got this core of people that have this crew here that now holds, not all the gold, but a lot of it. And that has a lot of power and a lot of sway and a lot of stories that you could tell with that. And so I think that that's so interesting in the position that we're in right now. So I think that what's great is what the NWA is going to end up having is we're going to get 2 things. We'll get people tuning in who want to see Tyrus get his ass kicked, and they want to see that title be taken away from Tyrus because they hate Fox News and they hate the conservative stance on a lot of stuff. There's a group of people that are going to do that. On the other side, there's the 2 million people who already like him and want to see him succeed and want to see him as champion. So who are we getting? Well, then you get everyone. And that's the goal, is you want to have a place where everyone can come and enjoy pro wrestling. And that's what we have. And I think that that's fantastic, is it doesn't just speak to one crowd. We have both, and it allows for that deliberation, and it allows to have a split crowd too. Sometimes those are really fun.
Almost the John Cena effect, right?
Exactly. It's F.U. Cena, go Johnson. It's the echoing effect that you get with that. And so I think that puts us in a really, really interesting place where we are. And I'm excited for it. I think it's going to do us quite well. And I think at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, in the fact that, we had a lot of people buy pay-per-views. We had a lot of people show up in New Orleans. We're going to have a lot of people show up in Knoxville. And if it turns out that that's not true, then maybe I was wrong. But I don't think so. It's one of those things where people try to bring the politics into everything. And it's like, well, at the end of the day, if you take a look at Eastern Tennessee, if you want to break it down just from a political standpoint, isn't Kane the mayor of Knox County? Who's more conservative than Kane? So that whole area has similar thoughts to the way Tyrus thinks of politics. So why wouldn't you think that they wouldn't show up to cheer for him at the pro wrestling show? So it's at the end of the day, yes, Tyrus is the man at the top of the mountain and arguably the face of the National Wrestling Alliance. But the National Wrestling Alliance as a whole has lasted for 75 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see us going anywhere for another 75 years.
And hey, it's, while we can call him the face or Kamille the face,
right,
wrestling has always been a melting pot, right? Wrestling has different people of different races, genders, right, gender identity, age.
Ted, so I'm glad you brought that up, because there's really not a lot of discussion right now. He's also the first African-American NWA World's Heavyweight Champion of the Lightning One era.
Mm-hmm.
And the last person to hold that championship since, what was it, R-Truth? Wow. Since, Ron Killings was NWA champion. So it really should be something that's kind of celebrated, to be honest.
That makes sense. But I guess my point is just, even if he isn't your cup of tea, if he is your cup of tea, that's great. If he isn't, there's a lot of people representing many different things in the company who you can attach yourself to. Like, right, there's so many great talents, and not just in the NWA, all over in professional wrestling. And it's what makes professional wrestling great, is because you don't see so many people from so many different backgrounds come together quite like you do in professional wrestling.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the best part of it. That's the best part of it.
Like I said, you've been very generous with your time, and I appreciate it. Let's get on out of here. Let's hit some more plugs and just remind people what to check out, where to go. And honestly, like I said, you've been great. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, I love the conversation, Ken. And if anybody's interested in talking to me, if Twitter still exists by the time you hear this, you can find me at Joe Galli News. I'm on Instagram at Joe Galli. You, of course, can catch NWA Power Tuesdays on FITE TV, catch the replay on Fridays on our NWA YouTube channel. We also have NWA USA, which is available Saturdays at noon Eastern on the NWA YouTube channel and also on FITE TV. 33 with William Patrick Corgan comes out every week, where we debut a new song from the Smashing Pumpkins. And you can find that wherever you get your finer podcasts. And then, with everything happening in the world today, you never know what social media platform is going to be there or whatever. But pretty much, if you just put in Joe Galli, you'll find me on all the new ones that are coming out. You on Mastodon yet?
Not yet.
Mastodon.
Hive is one.
Hive. Yeah, I got Hive. I got that one.
I'm slacking on that still.
There was another one that I think Minds. I don't know. I can't keep up.
Me neither.
I just want to make sure I have at least a username. If it does go big, it's like, well, at least I'll have my name.
That's smart. And also check out Armbars and Sidebars on YouTube. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit a like on all the videos. Follow us on Twitter, Armbars Sidebar, and on Instagram at Armbars and Sidebars. Joe, thank you. You were an amazing guest. And that'll wrap this one up. Later.
Mahalo.